The three things we're going to dig into a little more deeply and that we put extra focus into with our Translating the Warrior program would be beliefs, reality factors, and skills and abilities. So, where do beliefs originate from? I like this little chart because it shows some places where beliefs can come from. Again, the key idea is there's messaging, and messaging can come in various forms. A lot of the time it does come from family. It can come from military culture. One interesting example, and I think a really common one. So because, and I will talk a little bit more about military culture, but because the culture is so structured and hierarchical, and there's just, like integrity, being on time, ethics, following the chain of command. One of the most frustrating things when I do have clients who transition out and they actually are working, they don't understand that people are not always on time or that they don't always respect authority, and it's mind-boggling and it seems so disrespectful for them. Like, the meeting was set at this time and it's 10 after and there's only 2 of us here. We're waiting for the other 3 people. Like, that just can't happen when you're in the military. So that's another aspect, I think, which again, I won't go into high-level focus on today, but even once people have made a successful transition, sometimes they need support in understanding the culture of a civilian workplace or the civilian workforce and how those are different. I will share just quickly, because I want to keep us moving today, some of the assumptions that I have either heard or had myself. First one is that military is, like, I just kind of assumed if I had a military client, they would always be male. Of course, I know there's females in the armed forces, but I just never really thought about it. I think a lot of people just assume male. Second thing I've heard, low education. It's kind of like if you don't really have any other options, you go into the military because your school could be paid for, or that you're not really you're not very smart if you're a soldier. Those sorts of assumptions. I will say, I think what I was thinking here, some of this too, is some of the more negative assumptions. Of course, there's a lot of positive beliefs that people hold as well, but I'll touch on some of the negative ones. All members are the same or kind of have similar responsibilities. I think there's a lot of people who don't actually think that, but because of the lack of awareness or maybe transparency and understanding of how the military operates, they're just kind of seen as a really kind of one overarching body, and everybody in it is kind of the same. And I know we've seen that with other client groups, whether it's students, we make assumptions, Indigenous population, we make assumptions, and I think we know that we shouldn't do that. This is another group where I think there's a lot of assumptions made, and each person, of course, there are overarching elements that are in common, but everybody still is an individual and has their unique experience. A lot of assumptions around personality and physical traits. Before I ever worked with anyone in the military, I was intimidated. I thought they were going to be scary and kind of aggressive and abrupt and dominant, and that I was like, I didn't know how I was going to handle that. That's just my thought on personality, but we've talked about some other ones too, like just the structure or rigid tunnel vision, that sort of thing. Veterans are wounded or fragile shells of who they once were, and they all have PTSD. Again, that's an overarching one, and I touched on that earlier, that PTSD is not uncommon, but it's actually not at a higher rate than the average population. But we see that on TV, right? The wounded soldier comes back and they are a shell of who they once were. That's what TV portrays to us. This is another piece I just wanted to talk about with culture. Military mindset. Give first to one's mission, then to one's fellow members, and last to oneself. So this does speak to that hierarchical nature that you give to your members, and you follow a chain of command. But also there's a real sense of family. You can call it brotherhood, but there's females too, so I'm going to call it family. Like, you would lay down your life for your family. That's how it is. The mission always comes first, but you don't put yourself first. And in a lot of cultures or people in civilian workforce, you are you put yourself first, or just your family first, not everyone around you as well. So that level of teamwork, commitment, dedication, service, ethics, the values that they uphold is really strongly ingrained. Especially for people, actually I would say people, whether they have a family structure on the outside or not, this becomes their family. That is one of the, and I won't speak too much on it today, but I did want to mention, one of the biggest challenges outside of career-related things, and career is the number one challenge, and job and employment coming out, that is the biggest challenge. But a really significant challenge, I guess, on the mental health side is around losing that family as well as the sense of identity. And I don't know if you've had this with other clients as well. If you work with people who are retiring, that sense of identity that comes from their career, I would say the closest for me that I've seen to military would be, and I mean there's always individuals who have a strongly tied identity, professional athletes. When I work with pro athletes who have aged out or injured out of their sport, because it is their whole life, they're just lost without it, and I see that with military population as well. The drawing out process is really the most challenging part. There are some resources for that. One thing I would say is just having basic skills lists. So I have some that I use where they'll have like headings like technical skills or leadership skills, and I use them a lot of the time for resume writing, where it'll break it into different categories and then it will have a whole bunch of verbs, and clients can look through and figure, oh, that's a good one, oh, I could use that here, and it helps sometimes draw out the points or the skill that they've been using. I like it with military clients because, again, they're not thinking of things in these terms. So when I bring out that list, oftentimes, even if they can't maybe come up with those words on their own, the skills that they have, when they see it on paper, they can identify it. And if the skill is critical thinking, then we can start to ask, where did you demonstrate that? Or can you give me an example of critical thinking? What did you do? Those sorts of questions. So what I will say is it takes more time. You have to dig in, but I think it's a component of drawing out and also educating them and teaching them how to think about those transferable skills and how those skills can relate to civilian occupations. So for example, that sharpshooter who thinks the only option is becoming a police officer, what I'm thinking is, just off the top of my head, hand-eye coordination, critical thinking, adaptable, calm under pressure, probably a team component, probably some strategy. I could go visual spatial perception, and then it's understanding where else those skills could be used. So of course that's an added step or an added thing that you would discuss with them. But I guess that's high level, and just some specifics also of how I help to draw those skills out. There are also certain tools. I'll share one with you on my resources page. One other thing, actually, there is a document that all military members can get. I believe it's called, somebody might be able to correct me, an MMRP. It's a military, I'll find the actual acronym. Basically what it is, it's kind of like a resume, except it's not written in civilian terms, and it identifies all the various training that they've done, any missions that they've done. There's often, especially for the commissioned officers, there's a lot of different training and education that they will go through, and so that's another way to help draw out the skills. If they access a copy of that military resume, then you can kind of go item by item and discuss and explore with them, and that's another really useful way to draw out the skills.